Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're enjoying your lunch right now. What you saw on the screen are some previews of our GPA entrance that will be announced tomorrow. So want to remind everybody we have our GPA banquet tomorrow, and you will see more of these clips and actually find out who wins in all our various categories. First off, I want to go ahead, before we do anything else, and thank AT&T for sponsoring this afternoon's lunch. So, Pete, thank you. So just want to remind everybody that the passport drawing will be held at the end of today's luncheon. So please turn in your completed passport to the NATOA registration desk for a chance to win a 2017 conference registration, one of 2 Shuttle Pro V2 multimedia controls donated by Swaggit, and a smart TV donated by Telview. You must be present to win. That means you cannot give somebody else the authority to collect for you. So you've got to be in this room, okay? Before we go on, we did mention AT&T sponsoring today's lunch. I just want to go ahead and just run through our other sponsors for this year's conference. And at the end, I'd like you to all show your appreciation by a very hearty round of applause. We have CenturyLink, Comrex, CTC Technology and Energy, Beck TV, Mobility, Unicom, WIA, Kissinger and Fellman, Sony, Grande Communications, American Tower, Best and Krieger, Tightrope, Google Fiber, Ross, the Kitch Law Firm, NCTA, and the City of Austin. You will notice a lot of new names on that list, so we hope to see them again next year in Seattle, and we'd like to see all our old friends next year in Seattle as well. Just want to remind you all that the Austin City Hall tour will meet in the lobby immediately after the 2:30 session ends, so that's going to be about 3:45 or so. Again, the Austin City Hall tour, meet in the lobby. And then later on this evening, we have the Google Fiber reception. Again, start meeting in the lobby around 5:30 for shuttles to take you to Google Fiber. So we will have food and drink and entertainment, so you'll have a good time. I'm just going to put this out here right now so I don't have to hear it. You get transportation there, you're on your way back on your own. So if you overindulge, you will have to find your way back to this hotel. But there'll be taxis and things out there. So there's lots of restaurants in that area. So see that other part of Austin away from the hotel here. So again, 5:30, folks. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jody and Tony to go on with our awards ceremony for this afternoon.
The overall script, I don't know the order of things.
Yes, I do, looks like I do yoga.
Yes, you go ahead and do that.
Oh, okay.
Then hand that to me when you're done. So
I'll
I
just
can...
leave it there.
Okay.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Again, this is I'm Tony Perez with the City of Seattle. So before anything, I want to make another shameless plug for the City of Seattle, and looking forward to seeing all of you there and more people there next year. So invite your friends and colleagues too. This is part of the program where I get to acknowledge the contributions of some NATOA members who have contributed mightily to the achievements of our organization. Each year, the NATOA Board of Directors selects and vote on a slate of individuals that have made significant contributions to NATOA throughout the year. Whether it's in maintaining a committee chair role or presence long after your term has ended, serving as committee chair in our largest committee, a role typically reserved for board members, spearheading the immense task of planning an entire track of conference sessions, or helping to cultivate relationships with elected officials and establish ties with municipal leagues. This year's slate of candidates is truly deserving of special recognition for their above and beyond efforts to the betterment of NATOA and to all the work we all do. It's my pleasure to announce NATOA's 2016 Ovation Award recipients. So please hold your applause until I've announced all of them. And please come up as I call your name. First, we have Pan Berrien. Next. Remember what I said. We have Pam Berrien, and then my Bronx buddy, Rich Desimone, Barry Fraser, Stephanie Givens, Donna Keating, and finally Barbara Thornton. Please come up and accept your Ovation Awards.
Is she going to take a photo?
Barry, all right.
I'll go on this.
Well, now's a good time for applause. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Tony. And I'm Jody Miller. If I haven't met you already, I'm the president of NATOA Board this year. And we have two board members who will be leaving us this year, and we want to bring them up and thank them for all of their service. Catherine Rice has reached her term limit on our board of directors. She has been, she staked her claim this morning at our chapter breakfast meeting as being the longest serving person around here, and I don't know if that's really true or not, because I don't know if she's old enough, but she says 1984 is when she got involved in NATOA. She's been very active in many areas, but broadband is her passion, and she's worked very hard in helping with planning the webinars, and just recently became chair of the Virginia chapter, and so we know that she'll still be involved, but she will be missed on the board. And Dwight Williams, Dwight is out here, I hope, will also be leaving the board this year, and he is from Texas. He's on the NATOA chapter. He's been very involved in multimedia and PEG programming and management issues, and both of these people will be dearly missed, and we just want to give them a huge round of applause and thank them for their service. All right. And another new job that I have that I'm doing for the first time this year is I get to select the Chapter Excellence Award, and that's the role of the president, I'm told. And I now understand what Tony went through for the past 2 years when he was president. It's a very, very hard thing to do. For those of you who don't know, we have 14 chapters right now, and some of them are state chapters and others are regions that have several states involved. They range from having been founded in the early 1980s to some of our most recent chapters. JAG, the Jersey Access Group, and CCUA, Colorado Communications and Utility Alliance, officially organized as chapters in around 2013. And VTOA, the Virginia chapter, sort of reorganized, I believe, in 2014. And for those who don't know, our most recent chapter is Hawaii. They like to go by the name Hi NATOA, but I personally prefer Aloha Toa, would have been my choice. And I know you're all wondering when our first national conference will be at our newest chapter. So, I had to read through some very, very impressive annual reports from all of those chapters, and they've all worked very hard and done great things. They are our conduit between our National Association and our members, and they provide that two-way communication back and forth. Many of them are conducting conferences, webinars, legislative advocacy, and all kinds of support for our members, and we really appreciate all of you. The chapter that I chose was involved in industry-backed legislation preventing local governments from providing broadband. They used their expertise to help the Municipal League to try to repair that issue. They helped initiate a new strategy that helped local governments conduct elections and have the voters speak out on that issue. I know some of you are figuring it out. They have 2.5 million citizens represented in the 42 communities that are part of their chapter. They also were involved in federal issues and filed comments and participated in several proceedings in DC. Locally, they helped negotiate some innovative franchises with a couple of our providers and have been willing to share those with members around the country. Their board members presented at multiple events, including the Municipal League conventions and other broadband conferences in their state. They had their first full statewide conference last year. It was a 2-day event, and it was very successful, so they'll be doing it again this year in November. Now I know you're figuring it out. But a couple of things that tipped them over the top were they provide scholarships for smaller towns in their state to attend their state conference, and they provide 4 annual scholarships for members to attend this NATOA conference, and they pay for their registration, airfare, and hotel for 4 people every year to travel to the national conference. So congratulations, CCUA, the Colorado chapter of NATOA. All right, and one final comment. I just want to be clear that no one from Colorado tried to influence me in any way towards my decision. It was a very, very careful and thought-out process, and with that, I believe it's time for our presentation. Steve?
So we're on? Well, great. Well, folks, this is the educational part of today's luncheon. We actually were going to have 2 speakers today, but Angela Simpson from NTIA had to pull out. So it's just going to be a one-on-one conversation with Michael Schuler from NCTA. And before we start, you know, I like what you guys did at INTS show. They didn't have to wear ties or jackets. It was really cool. We need to change that here. Well, thank you, Ken. You can take your coat off, too, so you can really feel home. It's hot out there. Okay, first off, I just want to ask people, what does NCTA stand for?
Yeah.
It's got a new name, folks. Okay, so it's still NCTA, but it is now the Internet and Television Association. So that was just changed, I think, this week.
Monday.
So you guys are getting breaking news. And Michael was kind enough to give me one of his business cards. He said, look how colorful they are. I won't tell you what else he said about them, but they're very colorful. So again, NCTA has a new name. The bad thing about this story is that it really kind of took away my first question that I was going to have for Michael because, as I mentioned, the INTX show in Boston this past year, everyone knows it as the cable show. Well, it's not called the cable show anymore. And now NCTA doesn't have cable anymore. It's got this new internet and television name. So first off, Michael, I'm just going to throw it to you. And are we seeing the end of cable?
No. This is not the first time we've changed our name. Back in the day, we were the National Community Television Association. Then when I joined in 1982, we were the National Cable Television Association, which is what I still think of us as, I think, 2 generations later. We changed our name about, maybe about 10 years ago to the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, right about the time that we were trying to convince the Supreme Court that our provision of internet access service was not a telecommunications service. And now the thought is that the convergence of all the services that we in the industry provide and are moving towards providing has gone beyond what a lot of people think of as cable television. For someone like me who's been dealing with the industry for as long as I have, and with NATOA and all of you folks for as long as we have, cable is still, as we all know it, near and dear to my heart. And we still, as far as I know, are subject to the definition of cable television in the Cable Act and to franchises all across the country. So cable is not going to disappear from our world, but the name has disappeared because it shows that the industry and the industries that we all play in are changing, and it's a dynamic industry, and we want to portray the dynamism that our members still feel towards where we're heading in the future.
Well, you know, I didn't really give any type of formal introduction to Michael here because we have this great app that has everyone's full bio on it, but I just want you to remember that Michael is the VP and Deputy General Counsel of NCTA, and he has worked there a couple of shifts, and one of which was back starting in 1982, and while he was there, he worked on enacting and implementing the 1984 and the 1992 Cable Acts. And anybody else know what's significant about that time period from 1982 on? Here's a little thing. He was there when Chairman Wheeler was the president and CEO of NCTA. So you know what? If we see Michael later on at the reception at Google, maybe we can get some stories about how Chairman Wheeler was at NCTA in the old days.
Yeah, my lips are sealed.
We'll have drinks. So first off, what we're going to do, Michael and I met earlier this morning, and we're trying to figure out how are we going to fill up this time, because it's just he and I, and we talked up there for about an hour and a half. So for us, this is going to be like a rehash of what we talked about. But we talked on a lot of different issues, and I'm just going to throw some things out, get Michael's feedback on it. Remember, he does work for an association, just like I do, so there are probably certain things that he won't want to address. He would like to, but he probably won't. And I find myself in that same situation. And of course, I say some things I never should. So we're hoping for those moments too. So privacy. That's a big FCC proceeding that's going on right now. The expectation is that Chairman Wheeler and the Commission will act on something on privacy. Take it away. What's NCTA doing on this?
Well, privacy is not something new to the cable industry. There's a privacy provision in the Cable Act 1992. Privacy is not something that's new to the internet world, because the FTC has for years been groping its way through figuring out regulations for the various players in the internet world in terms of what can and can't be disclosed, what rights, what disclosures can only be made if consumers opt into allowing their information to be disclosed, and what information can only be disclosed unless they opt out of disclosures. What has changed is when the FCC determined, reversed itself. I referred to this before back when we were talking about whether internet service is a telecommunication service or not. When they last year reversed their determination and said that internet access service is a telecommunications service subject to the provisions of Title II, the common carrier provisions of Title II of the Act. That changed things because services that are subject to Title II as telecommunications services are outside the jurisdiction of the FTC, and Title II has provisions that do govern privacy for telecommunications carriers. What's called the CPNI regulation, what's the P? But the information that can't be disclosed without certain opt-out or opt-in provisions. So one thing that the Commission could have done, now that it has jurisdiction over internet access providers, although it doesn't have jurisdiction over all the other players in the internet that the FTC retains jurisdiction over, is to say, all right, we will harmonize our rules with the FTC's rules, have the same sorts of rules. The FTC has rules that generally allow for disclosures of customer information gathered by those in the edge providers and others in the internet world, except for sensitive data. Sensitive data is stuff like health information, financial information, information about children in a household. Those rules, the FTC has more stringent rules that require, that prohibit disclosures unless consumers opt out of those disclosures and allow their information to be disclosed. But Chairman Wheeler has gone down the road of proposing much more stringent regulations for internet access providers, like cable operators and telephone companies, that would require opt-in for just about all services. That would set as the presumptive rule that any customer information can only be disclosed by an internet access provider if the consumer affirmatively says it can be disclosed. And we know that opt-in, opt-out rules are basically rules that nudge consumers one way or the other. If you have a rule that applies unless consumers, if you say this information can't be disclosed unless consumers allow it to be disclosed affirmatively, that will have a different outcome than if you tell the same consumer that the information can be disclosed unless you say it can't be disclosed. Most consumers, with respect to disclosure requirements like these, I think it's fair to say, ignore the notices that they get. And they just, so that if whatever the default situation is, that's what they're going to do. So if you say that virtually no information can be disclosed unless the consumer says it's okay to disclose it, you're basically putting a damper on the disclosure of a lot of information. That may or may not be okay depending on the information. You may agree that it's dangerous to that the internet poses great privacy concerns for all people, or you may think they're not so great concerns. Individuals feel differently. If you look out there in the world, I may think that privacy is a major concern, but I take all of Google's services and I'm giving it knowingly sort of doing that. And a lot of people do that as well. But our concern is one, as it so often is and so often has been in our dealings with regulation, an issue of regulatory parity. And it's regulatory parity that leads to a competitive parity, because if only the internet access providers like us in the internet world are subject to stringent requirements on the use of personal information, and all the other providers in the world, the edge providers, are allowed to glean that information and use it for the various purposes, including commercial purposes of making that information available, or simply using it to make their services work better because they have access to consumers' information and they can make the services they provide better because of it. We're simply put at a competitive disadvantage. And so our view would be that the ideal situation would be to follow the FTC's lead and regulate all players in the internet ecosystem subject to the same privacy rules, because it's the same consumers' information whether they're giving it to edge providers or giving it to the ISPs. And I think that's where we are heading.
Well, here's a nice little plug for NATOA and its membership. One of the benefits of being a NATOA member is that we have a policy and legal committee that has a monthly phone call, and privacy issues do come up on this. And for those of you that were on this last month's call, one of the issues that we brought up as far as privacy is concerned is a case involving AT&T and the FTC and what the court said in that particular case. And it looks like there's a possibility that the edge providers who are currently covered by FTC regulations might have a hole and escape any type of enforcement action by either of these agencies. So we'll keep an eye on that. But just before we go on to the next topic, for those of you that were here on Monday, we had a whole day session on 5G and what 5G means and what it's doing. And one of the parts of the presentations at the end of the day was on cybersecurity. And one of the speakers was talking about the issue of security and privacy. And he said, there is no privacy. So I think that's a lesson to learn, because I think when you start talking about protecting an individual's privacy, look how much we share and how much we give up just to achieve the different services that we get. So we'll keep an eye on that. Another thing that's been popping up in the news, and of course it's been popping up in the news for years, a rewrite. And we have an election in November. We're not going to ask you where you stand on the election, but the one thing that's coming up is a rewrite. And we keep seeing different stories that different possible chairs will say we're going to have a rewrite. Any ideas, any comments on that? Do we need one?
I might have a clearer idea of where I stand on the election than where I...
No, you got to answer now. Okay, hypo.
But I'm not going to answer. But we have been on record for a long time as saying that as our world evolves from the world that many of you knew early on, when we were the only player in town providing multi-channel video programming services, and we owned many of the program networks that we provided, to today's world where we are no longer we are in a highly competitive environment, both competing with other MVPDs like the satellite guys and the phone companies, and in competition now increasingly with internet providers, internet program providers and platforms, that a regulatory scheme that singles us out for unique regulation just because we were the cable guys may not make any sense anymore. And that's not to talk about, we're not talking here about the narrow area of rights-of-way management, I don't think. I mean, I think that's a unique issue that applies to companies that provide their services over municipal rights-of-way. But the provisions of the 1984 and 1992, in particular, Cable Act, were put into place largely in order to do two things. One, to assuming that the cable operators at that time were the only players in town and had a certain degree of market power, to impose regulations that constrained any abuse of that market power for consumers. So we had rate regulation provisions. We had other provisions that were designed to ensure that the services we provided were not exploitative of market power. And two, provisions that were designed to end what was perceived as the monopoly by jump-starting and providing assistance to the competitors that might be out there. The satellite guys were just getting off the ground at the time, literally. And And there were concerns, for example, that since cable operators at that time owned most of the most popular video programming, that we would withhold that programming from competitors in order to preserve and sustain ourselves as the only provider in town. That is in virtually all respects ancient history now. Even at the time, the legislative history of the 92 Act shows that Congress intended that competition is a better regulator of how resources ought to be allocated and how best to serve consumers than regulation. We just didn't have competition at the time. But when there's competition, our view is that the regulatory scheme ought to change. And that it doesn't make sense to have silos based on titles, whether if you're a cable operator providing some of the same services as competitors on the internet side, you shouldn't be regulated differently. We're nudging at that deregulation case by case, issue by issue, as we have to do and the Commission has the authority in many areas to change their regulations. As for a telecommunications rewrite, that may be the sane thing to do, to sit down and have the Congress decide, how do we now deal with this world of the internet that's completely different? But you could say that about a lot of things about Congress right now, and they, I don't know if dysfunctional is the right word,
It probably is.
But they're not. The idea of predicting a rewrite of any major legislation at this time would be a long shot bet, I think, just because nothing major comes out these days. There's another election. We'll see what happens after that.
One issue that's near and dear to a lot of our members and is brought up quite often is customer service. And we were talking upstairs, and I think you're the first to admit that cable companies seem to be towards the bottom as far as consumers are concerned when it comes to customer service. And we talked about that. Why don't you share with us some of your thoughts about this? What can the industry do, or what does NCTA do to help address these type of issues?
Well, you're right. We don't have our head in the sand about customer service issues. At the same time, there have been customer service issues. If you are a consumer, you would say that there were customer service issues from the very beginning. And part of the reason for that, candidly, I think, is that this industry has, since the beginning, been in constant flux. It's technological flux. We keep getting, the service we provide keeps getting better and better and better. Not the customer. I'm not talking about customer service. I'm just talking about the nature of the service that we provide, from the days when we were a 13-channel retransmitter of broadcast, over-the-air broadcasting, to when we provided satellite-delivered programming, to when we provide on-demand programming, when we provide a DVR that's now based in the cloud that allows you to watch your programming on your iPad and your iPhone. It's constant change. And it's constant change in the last decade or so, or more, that is done in competition with other companies that are providing the same services that we are, and keep trying to get a step ahead. Even when we rebuilt our systems to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars in the 90s and 2000s, it started out because DBS had digital capabilities, and it could provide many more channels than we could provide with high-quality digital audio and video, and so that drove revisions. But when you do that, and you think about, well, you have to decide, I guess, where you allocate your resources. And somewhere often along the line, it's customer service. The person at the end of that phone call when you first call up to ask for something, that gets the short shrift. I think it has gotten the short shrift, and we pay a price for that. I would say we would pay a price as well if we had cut investment in the quality of services too. But the truth is, we pay a price for customer service, and so our companies recognize that, and some of them have made major investments in just the last couple of years. And Comcast has certainly made a major investment in essentially, it's the equivalent of a rebuild, from my perspective, of rebuilding customer service, hiring people, figuring out how to do it. It's not easy to do it. It's a funny situation. I was saying to Steve before, when in the old days even, when there'd be an outage for a period of time, and consumers of our service would be so angry. They wanted to watch this show or that show, and something went out. And it was very frustrating because we also knew that telephone service, at least our technical guys would tell me, the telephone service would go over copper wires, went out from time to time. It would just go out for minutes or half hour or something. But most people don't know that because you're not on the phone for the constant time that you're on cable. Things would, so it would go off and nobody would know it. But an outage that lasted a half hour at the end of the Super Bowl was a catastrophe. So the bottom line position is we know it, we're continually working at it. We used to have, and we still have, some of the companies did. The NCTA initiated a program a couple of decades ago that would give people a refund a $20 refund if the guys that were coming out to your house to fix your house or to do an install or whatever didn't get there at the time they said they were going to get there. We try, and it's in the competitive world we're in now. We just have to keep trying harder.
It's funny when Michael mentioned this thing about telephones in days gone by that, again, you're not on the telephone 24/7. So when there was an outage, you may not even know about it. But the way my workstation is set up at home, I have my little modem there with the little flashing lights, and every time my broadband goes out, that little light goes out. So I know every single minute that darn thing goes out. And it's very frustrating. But it is a 24/7 service that we're looking at. So thank you for at least acknowledging that we do have a problem with customer service and willing to talk about that particular aspect of it. Just really quick, it's funny that on Monday again, for those of you who did not come Monday, you missed a great session because we had Vanessa from AT&T, and Vanessa was talking about her time as a telephone operator. And it's like, oh my gosh, you used to remember operators in the old days? And I was telling Michael when we were talking, I said, when I was a kid, if you had cable, that meant you lived out in the boondocks because you couldn't get over-the-air reception. So my uncle had a cabin up in the mountains in Big Bear in California, and it's like, oh God, we have to go up there, we can't watch TV, he's got that stupid cable thing. And now, how it just turned around, because when I was in college, I went back and visited friends in New York City, and they had this HBO thing. It's like, what's that? So all of a sudden, the whole service changed from living out the boonies to something you have to have. And I could see Jerry's shaking his head. You remember when you used to drive on the highways and you'd see these motels and it would say free HBO? It's like, what a deal was that? So. But again, I think we've had these problems before, but it's nice that we can talk with the other associations and say, listen, we've got a problem about this. So one thing I want to make sure we talk about, and we didn't talk about this upstairs, so now he's on the hook. Okay. What is, and I know there's a lot of examples out there, and I'm sure you can share them with us. What is the cable industry or internet industry doing to improve efforts to bring low-cost broadband services to low income? I know Comcast Internet has expanded to seniors, and I think there's things for veterans. I know HUD is trying to do things. Give us a little bit about what all these initiatives are out there.
There are initiatives, and I confess from the outset, the reason we didn't talk about it upstairs is I'm the legal guy, and these things go on, and I'm not always as up to speed about it. But you're right, companies have been at this for quite a while. The Comcast Essentials program that gives. Take a step back. And talk about something I did know about, which leads into all this, because we've been doing this since the very beginning. When in the old days, and it's an anachronism now, we talked about cable in the classroom. That was the start of things. We made sure, and we made commitments as an industry to make sure that the schools, that our members who were part of cable in the classroom, made a commitment to wire the schools because we understood that schools were the first place to start in making sure people had access to all the services that cable was capable of providing even then, when households didn't all have them. And that's the model from which we've moved into providing internet services, subsidies to internet services for people to get a lower, a subsidized rate for internet service. We are also, I think we've also been proponents, and this is on the legal side, though, the telecom side that I don't deal with as much, with the universal service subsidies to make sure that those moved away from typically subsidizing voice telephone service providers where where people already had competitive choices, to making sure that the subsidies from the Universal Service Fund would go into internet services as well, so that in areas that were not served with high-speed internet service because it wasn't always affordable to do it and to deploy it, some of the subsidies would go to that. We obviously also share an interest in expanding the access to these services, and it's been part of the industry's commitment as technology moves along to find ways to make sure that the people who can't afford service, or schools that need the service of kids have the effect of having an internet library at their fingertips. It's going to be it's not a problem that's going to get anything but more acute as we look at issues of it's a subset of issues of income inequality that the political system is trying to deal with, and it's a subset of the issues of educational policy that we're trying to come attuned to. If people need, if access to internet it becomes something other than a luxury service, then it needs to be available to people as ubiquitously as possible. And it could be the government that makes that possible through programs and subsidies, but it's also something that the industry realizes it can do and play a role in. We've cooperated with the FCC in making these services available without regulation, just by agreement and moral suasion by the Commission and moral acceptability by the Commission, by the industry.
I think I can speak for NATOA that our members really believe that broadband is a quote-unquote utility. It really is a basic need for citizens. And though we could debate how much industry has done to bring this to low-income folks, we know you're out there working on it, so we thank you and your members for that. And I think we'll all continue at the local level to make sure that these services are made available to those who can't afford it, especially when you consider that most companies accept job applications only over the internet, and that you really need the internet just to even do your daily homework. So John Hovis reminded me that there was a proceeding that was just announced that's coming out from the FCC looking for comments on expanding the E-rate program to provide for wireless connections to school buses and other facilities, such as Commissioner Rosenworcel mentioned yesterday. So again, if you weren't here yesterday to see Commissioner Rosenworcel, you should kick yourself, because she talked about this very issue. And these are things that we really are concerned with. And Michael, thank you for letting me have these little editorial comments.
Yeah, I don't think I said that internet service was a utility.
No, that's what our members say. Nilda's here. Did you hear him say that? I hear him say it. Okay. Okay. We're going to have just a few more minutes, and then we'll have just room for one or two questions, because we're going to have a drawing. But you mentioned this word a couple times, and Chairman Wheeler has mentioned this word more than a couple times: competition, competition, competition. So that's the mantra on the FCC. There's a couple other proceedings that you guys are involved in, so we can just go down these and throw out a couple of comments on this, and let's see where we go. The MVPD proceeding.
Well, the MVPD proceeding that's a proceeding in which the Commission asked for comments as to whether certain online services, in particular, they narrowed it to online services that provided multiple real-time channels of programming, of which there are some out there, ought to be classified and regulated as MVP, as multi-channel video programming distributors under the Communications Act. MVPDs have certain rights and they have certain obligations under the statute. They have rights such as they may have rights to the program access provisions of the Act. In other words, the vertically integrated cable operator programmers cannot withhold their programming from MVPDs. They have responsibilities, EEO responsibilities, and some other obligations under the Act. The provision is sort of moribund right now. It was moving along. We opposed it, but this is partly a legal statutory issue. They do not, the definition of, and I won't get into the details of the definitions of the Act, but they don't meet the definitions of the Act. It would be unbounded. There would be companies that offered 2, 3 channels of programming. Steve, you and I could make ourselves into an MVPD by starting a service and getting contracts from 3 channels that we, the CAT channel or something that showed, and we would be subject, and then we'd be able to go to other programmers who were vertically integrated and say, we want your program, we want your sports programming. We want to be able to, we got these 3 CAT channels, but we want to be able to show the local regional sports network. And it would wreak havoc on that. But it turned out that the edge providers who would also get those benefits looked at the implications of that and said, this actually sort of means that for the first time, edge providers would be subject to a regulatory scheme at the FCC, and they thought they didn't like that too much either. And the next thing we know, the chairman has kind of held that. It's still out there. It's still sitting there, but it's not moving.
Oh, by the way, I think I came across the CAT channel one night, so it was really late, but it was a good one. So hang in there. You got that, huh? See? You guys all had that poster in college. Okay, the set-top box proceeding.
Well, that's a big one. That's a big one of which we would have more to say. I'd have more to say if I were talking next week than this week, because next Thursday the Commission is going to consider this matter. This is a provision, as you probably know. This is close to the hearts of kids. This is cable law. This is not the internet. I mean, it has to do with the internet, but this is right out of the Cable Act. Section 629 of the Cable Act was added in 1996 to require that cable operators allow the retail availability of set-top boxes. So in one sense, so that consumers don't have to continue to use the box that's provided and rent or just use the box that's provided by the cable operator over and over, that they go out and buy one, like they can buy a phone or buy a cable modem. It was inserted into the 1996 Act by Congressman Bliley from Richmond, whose main constituent was the now moribund Circuit City, in order to provide what Circuit City thought might someday be a retail market for the boxes. The boxes, of course, have evolved. They're different. They're quite different now than they were 30 years ago, and they're quite different from what they were in 1996 in terms of their functionalities. That's what led to the cable card solution following 1996. The idea that you can't have retail. In the old days, as some of you may remember, back when the cable box, all it did was take all the cable channels that were coming in on channels that your TV set couldn't receive and put them on channel 3. It was a converter box that just did that and nothing else. And yeah, you could have made those available at retail. And people did. There were magazines that sold them. But now, what people realized right after the '96 Act is that you can't, or even at the time of the Act, is you can't just say, all right, you can go out and buy a cable box that works with the Cox or Comcast or whatever system, and plug it in instead of that box, because there needed to be some kind of security component, because the box manufacturer doesn't know what services you've subscribed to and what services you've subscribed to and what you're allowed to get from that box. And so you can't have a box that allows you to get all the services if you haven't paid for them. So there had to be some technology, some security device. That was what the cable card was all about, was you could get the box if anybody wanted to manufacture it, but you'd have to get a little device from your cable operator that you would put into a slot in that box that would tell the box what services you're allowed to get and what services you're not allowed to get, and would be that could be accessed by the cable system. It was not a particularly happy solution for customers. But first of all, it's not that people don't like having a box in their house sometimes, but it wasn't an objection to the cable box in particular. It was, it would be better if they didn't have one, but that's what made cable work. And so people had those boxes. So what's happened now with the set-top box proceeding is that in the aftermath of the kind of the failure of the cable card, the Congress mandated a study by the Commission of new downloadable security devices that might be able to be a substitute for the cable box. And they came up with a proposal that would have completely undone the concept of the cable box for people who wanted to build a box of their own. They would be able to, the original proposal of the Commission would have given any box manufacturer who wanted to provide cable service, along with whatever internet services they might provide, like you think of the Roku box or the Apple TV box or all these services that provide television service. They could make a cable box too, but the cable operator would have to give all those box manufacturers information regarding, they have to give the programming, deliver the programming, give information about who subscribes to what to that programming, and then the owner of the box could basically deconstruct the cable service that's coming down from the cable operator and rebuild it in a different way, whether it's just the program guide would be, they could provide their own program guide, they could provide services like they could group services together, so they could, for example, group the movie channel from HBO with the pirated movie channel that they get on the internet and put that up there on the screen. Just basically put their own service on. You'd still be paying, as the customer, you would still be paying for Comcast service, but when you bought the box from these other guys, they would be providing an additional service of grouping, of maybe not even carrying all the services to people, doing what they want with the service. That was a thoroughly unacceptable solution to the cable industry. It was also a thoroughly unacceptable solution to the content providers who contract with cable operators, not simply to allow their service to go to customers, but how their service is going to go to customers, how that channel lineup is going to appear, what tier they're going to be on, how they're going to appear, because they have an interest in that for their economic models, for their sale of advertising, for all kinds of reasons. So it's all done contractually. This would have undone those contracts and allowed the box manufacturers to do it completely differently. There was a pushback from the industry, there was a pushback from the content owners, there were pushbacks from a lot of people who would have been roadkill in addition from this process. So we proposed, along with some other interested parties, a simpler approach, which is one that we were moving toward, the industry was moving towards anyways, which is an apps-based approach. The same kind of apps, when you have your Roku box or your Chromecast or your Apple TV, it's full of the apps that Apple or Roku has contracted with to allow you to get there. You might still have to purchase, if you have Netflix on there, Roku can't give you Netflix. You have to buy it. But there's an app on there, and all you got to do is go and click on that, and it comes over the internet, and it's on your TV. Cable operators are creating their own apps. Like you may, I don't know who your operators are, but you may have one of those on your iPad right now that allows you to go to your iPad, hit an app, and you will see basically all the same. Your screen will look very much like it looks at home. If you're at home, it might look exactly like it looks at home. If you're here in Austin and you put it on, there may be some services that you can get that you could get at home, some services that you could only get in your own home because of the contractual provisions between the programmers and their copyrighted interests and the cable operators. But working those things out contractually, the cable operators are increasingly, Time Warner, now Charter, has apps that appear on the Roku box that are like the apps for Netflix or CBS or Hulu. You click on it and you get the cable service. We're moving towards, we proposed that, and because of all the pushback the Commission was getting on their other proposal, they're moving in that direction. They have not quite closed the loop on it, doing it right, because the problem that they perceive is that in order to have that box get exactly what you get if you're a cable customer and you get the Comcast box or the Cox box or whatever, you have to have all the program, all the services that you get on that box that the cable operator leases you on the app. And content providers don't always want to give you the same rights to be on an iPad or on your phone, or they want to deal with their own copyright interests by negotiating with Comcast or Cox or whoever the cable operator is to get those on. And that's how it was moving forward. The Commission has said, nope, everybody's got to be on there and they all got to be there. So we have to set up some kind of a supervisory copyright agency, basically. They don't call it a copyright agency, but that basically to supervise and impose standardized requirements that will ensure that every service that's on the cable box gets on every other app all over the place, and they're going to dictate the terms of the contractual provisions that make that work, and essentially establish a compulsory license for box manufacturers that will enable them to carry all the services of the content owners, whether the content owners want that or not. That's the major last sticking point, and it will cause problems and it will cause concerns and it will probably cause future litigation if it doesn't get resolved between now and Thursday. Well, Thursday is when the Commission's going to decide this.
So congratulations to all those communications attorneys out there, because you're going to have business for a long time. As you can see, it's a complicated proceeding. It's a proceeding that, once again, Commissioner Rosenworcel had indicated months ago, it's complicated. And she's actually kind of one of the iffy fence-setting votes on this particular proceeding. So it'll be interesting to see what they do next week. It'll be interesting to see if they end up yanking it for some reason. But we'll keep in touch because I know our members are really looking at this. It kind of goes just beyond a choice of a box and possibly lower consumer prices. There's a lot of stuff in that mix. So we will be talking about this, but I'm glad that we finally cleared up the reason because of the failure of cable card why Circuit City went out of business. And you guys know what Circuit City is, right? Yeah, it's kind of like Big Buy or whatever. Yeah, poor company. Oh, so sad. Michael, are you going to be around for a little bit?
I can be around for a little bit.
Excellent. It's 2 o'clock. We're supposed to break now and go to the next sessions. I know, and see, my boss is telling me that I have to do something. So if Michael can hang around, he'll gladly talk to you guys. I know he said he's been to these type of meetings before. He is used to the slings and arrows, and he said he can take it. And Nilda's here. She will help guard him. But I have, excuse me for 1 second, just have a seat there, because you're going to get to witness this whole thing. In fact, I'm going to have you draw these things. We are having our drawing now. Do we have everything in the bowl?
Yes.
All
the entries are in there? Yes.
All the entries? Do we have my list of things that I'm giving them?
It's on your script, sorry. The TV, the two controllers, and the 2017 conference registration.
Well, the conference registration is the most important, so we'll keep that one to the end. What have we got, a TV set?
TV, yep.
Really? Wow. Okay, this is a big deal. Okay, so we're going to pull this out for a TV provided by?
Oh, provided by Telecom, sorry.
Provided by Telview. Thank you, Telview.
Oh, one more thing to blame the cable industry for.
Exactly. Someone's going to be switching the satellite. Okay, Jonathan Lipsott? Yay! Just take that on over to. And our next is
The two media multimedia controllers, they're underneath the podium.
two multimedia something or others.
Those are donated by Swag.
Okay. And wow, it's kind of a cool looking box. Okay, and this is provided by Swaggit. Thank you, Swaggit. Okay, the first one goes to Abby Lynn Anderson. That's a great name. Come on up. And the next one goes to, I love that people have easy names this year.
Oh, man.
Phyllis Stallings
Okay.
from Cobb County. Wait a second, what is this? You give that to her? Okay. And this is the last one. This is going to be the registration for 2017 and Seattle, right? Seattle, September 11th through the 14th. Got another really good name. Richard Asmus? Osmus? From the city of Arvada. Okay, so we will give this to Tanya, and we'll take care of that. And folks, I ask you all for a nice round of applause for Mike Schuler coming here from NCTA. Michael was a good sport to come here and speak to all of you. I think it's really important that NATOA brings a lot of industry folks in so you can have some interface with them, find out what their positions are, but most importantly, share your positions with Michael. So please, if you have a question about something, talk to him. Remember, he's not from a particular provider, but he can give you a good overview of what's going on out there.
Thank you,
Sir,
Dave.
thank you very much.